What is the creepiest, most unexplained thing you have ever experienced? Story 1. When my brother and I were around 4 or 5 years old, we lived in a house that was about 100 years old. One day we were walking up the stairs when we saw a tall man in a black coat and top hat walk into the living room, which was to the left of the bottom of the stairs. A bit freaked out, we thought our dad was pranking us, so we called out for him. Both of our parents came out of the kitchen, which was on the opposite side of the stairs and completely separate from the living room. I had not thought about it for a long time, and we never spoke about it. Then about a month ago, my daughter asked if I believed in ghosts, so I told her the story. Literally seconds later, my phone beeped. It was my brother saying, "I was just talking to my partner about paranormal things." Do you remember the guy in the top hat? Story 2. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was lying in bed trying to sleep through a brutal thunderstorm. I was the only person sleeping on the second floor of a 150-year-old farmhouse. The house creaked and settled and was thoroughly terrifying to me as a child, so much that I usually slept with the lights on. I was convinced there were legions of ghosts and monsters ready to attack me, so this thunderstorm was not helping my nerves. I finally fell asleep, but I was awakened by deafening thunder. I looked up to see the wall near the foot of my bed with blood streaming down it. All of my nightmares were coming true. The problem was, I was not allowed to leave my bedroom. My parents had gotten tired of hearing that I was scared, so I lay there all night watching the blood drip down from the ceiling, paralyzed with fear. Finally, morning came, and I went running out of the room to get my parents. I pictured one of those moments like in a horror movie where only I can see the blood, but no, my parents could see it too. It turned out that after more than 100 years, the dark red bricks of the chimney were dissolving, and the dust from them formed a sludge in the rain. Story 3. My patient passed away on the wing I work on. She was terminal but not expected to go immediately. She was going to a facility with hospice after a fairly long battle with cancer. She was scheduled to go early the next morning. Her husband had plans to meet her there, and everything was set up. She was in good spirits, her assessment was fine, she took her medications, and she said she was going to watch the news and then take a nap. An hour later, I went to check on her. I was quietly checking her intravenous line, making sure her things were in reach, moving her table, and then noticed she was gone. She was sitting up, holding on to the side rail. She honestly looked like she was sleeping, but she had no heartbeat and no respirations. Most of the time when people pass, their mouth drops open and it is very obvious. With her, no. I had to call a coworker to confirm. I was expecting her to wake up, but she was gone. I attempted to contact her husband, who I could not reach, and I started the paperwork while also attending to my other patients. A few minutes later, I was by the central desk and someone asked, "Where were you?" I told them I was giving medication down the hall. I saw two of the other nurses exchange looks, but nurses can be strange, and since they did not elaborate, I continued on with my nightly duties. At the very end of the hall, while I was doing some patient education, the charge nurse came to get me. I assumed the husband was calling back, but that was not the case. Apparently, as I had been caring for my other patients at the opposite end of the ward, there had been phone calls coming out of the deceased patient's room to the central station, several of them with no answer, just breathing. I thought this had to be a prank, right? The phone rang, I looked and saw the patient's room number on the caller ID. I walked into the room. The phone was neatly on the bedside table, the television was off, and the deceased patient looked like she was napping. I checked the bathroom. It was empty. "I am going to leave the door half open," I said as I left the room. No more phone calls came. But during the next hour, alarms went off in empty rooms. Call lights came on for patients who could not move. An important piece of equipment suddenly stopped working, and a dementia patient kept complaining about another patient coming into her room, loosely fitting the description of the deceased. Her husband finally came to the unit because he knew why I had been calling. He spent a few minutes with her, and when he came out of the room, he found me and said, "She told me this morning she never wanted to go to a nursing home." Well, I guess she meant it. After that, everything returned to normal, or at least as normal as hospitals get. Story 4. A 2-for-1 many years apart, at the same apartment. Young teenage me. I never had much of a rebellious side to me, but my parents did not want me in their bathroom when they were not home. They, however, had a fantastic shower compared to the leaky one I was stuck with. We had a minor spat that particular morning, and they left to clear their heads. That meant it was time to use the fancy shower. Home alone extravagances are set pretty low when you are poor. Anyway, they had been gone about half an hour when I heard my dad stomp run into their room. He slammed his keys down, checked the answering machine, and I knew he had to have been angry, so I called out, "My shower drain was leaking again. Sorry, I'll be out in a minute." Stomp run to the bathroom door, then it just stopped. I called out to him and he started jiggling and turning the handle like crazy. The door was not locked and he was not an invalid at all. So I stepped out, wrapped a towel around me, and began saying, "What the heck?" as I opened the door. I opened it mid-shake, watching the knob turn, and there was no one on the other side. I ran through the apartment, saw that we still had a message, and the front door was still locked. My parents came home 2 hours later. The other one was a happy creepy about 10 years later. I had a cat I adopted that was a real menace. He would hiss, bat, and claw if you were lucky, bite if you were not. Or, if you were not me. He loved me. He would frequently attack my family members and then hide in my lap and go to sleep. He had a long battle against stomach cancer and he finally passed. By the time he passed, it was just my mom and me left in the apartment, and she, in her own way, missed him. About 2 weeks went by and I was up late one night playing an online game. I saw my cat walk down the hallway, so I instinctively reached down to pick him up to my lap. Then I felt really incredibly sad, knowing that clearly he was not there. That was enough to get me to log off for the night. A few seconds after I lay down, I felt a cat kneading right behind my back. I figured it was my brain messing with me due to tiredness. When I woke up, there was a little indentation on my blanket and a spot that was about 15 degrees hotter than the rest of my bed. I like to think it was him. He was a mean little cat, but I hope he was happy with me. Story 5. I used to work the opening shifts at a fast food restaurant, so I would get up at 3:30 in the morning to get ready and get there on time. When I was in my kitchen having some cereal, I looked out the window to see headlights pointing straight into the kitchen window at me. It was on a cul-de-sac behind my house, with no reason for anyone to be parked at that angle, especially at that time in the morning. Whoever it was stayed there as long as I was in the kitchen with the lights on. As soon as I finished eating and turned the lights off to go get in my vehicle, the car watching me backed up and started driving around to my house. When I got in my car, this vehicle was driving past me incredibly slowly, about 5 miles per hour. I have never been so afraid in my life. Story 6. My friend and I time traveled, or that is the easiest explanation. We were in high school and he was taking my bus back to my house with me. We got home around 2:45 and my mother got home around 3 o'clock. We decided to go hiking before my mother could say no, so we left a note on the counter and took off. We took our usual route up the backyard hill, making sure to avoid the people that resided in makeshift homes up there. We climbed some trees for a while, explored a section of the car graveyard we had not checked out before, and did other typical teenage exploring type stuff. We took a break near the top of the mountain. It was unusually beautiful that day, incredibly green, and there were seriously visible light beams shining down through the canopy. Like seriously pretty stuff. So of course I started running around through the light and decided we should probably start getting back, because my mother was probably going to be angry if we missed dinner. On the way back, we stumbled onto a pond we had never encountered before. It was small and had a single wooden boat on it. There were also a few teepees around the pond. Not old teepees. They looked ratty and unusable. We decided someone was probably living there and took a new path back home. We climbed down and up an old quarry and dropped off on the main road that leads to my house. We were absolutely filthy and over a mile from my place. We just walked the road back to my house. We arrived home before my mother, which seemed strange, so I threw out the note so she would not know we were out wandering. She got home like 3 minutes later wondering how we had gotten so dirty at school. She arrived home at her usual time, and we had only been gone a grand total of 13 to 15 minutes. We honestly do not even talk about that day anymore. It is too confusing. But yes, time travel. Story 7. A few years ago, my best friend and I lived in the mountains west of the San Francisco Bay and decided to get beers before the little local mountain store closed. We drove there in her car and walked in a few minutes before they closed at 9 o'clock. I remember looking at my phone and commenting to the guy working there that we were sorry to be those people who come in right as they are trying to close, but he knew us and was cool. We left the store by 9 o'clock. We were driving back, no beers or anything else had been consumed yet, and we turned onto the main road. Not a big road, no streetlights or anything, just the road that connects lots of smaller mountain roads. We lived about a mile into the woods to the right, and there were 3 roads we could take to get there. Naturally, when we came this way, we took the first road because it was closest. There are probably 2.5 or 3 miles between the first and the third roads, and it would have taken a couple of minutes to get to the third one, but suddenly we were passing it. We both went, "What the heck, was that the third turnoff? Did we even pass the first 2?" We had driven that same way literally hundreds of times. We knew every turn of that road. And all of a sudden, we had gone from turning onto the main road to passing the third turn in about 10 seconds. I got this feeling of dread and looked at my phone again, and it was 9:50. We had left the store no more than 2 minutes before, and suddenly it was almost an hour later, and we had driven maybe a mile. We were confused, so confused. Tried everything we could to explain it away, desperately tried to explain it, talked about it over the course of the night, and eventually just had to stop talking about it. We told a couple of people when it happened, and they will bring it up in conversation or ask to hear about it occasionally, and we will tell them. But that is all we really care to talk about it. It makes me feel weird every time I tell it. I think you probably know the feeling. Story 8. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I stayed up sort of late. When I got to bed, I was still feeling restless. I pulled all of my blankets around me and tucked myself against the wall, since my twin bed was flush with the wall. I was in bed awake for probably an hour when I started hearing a rather unsettling noise. Muffled crying. I focused on it, hoping it was my imagination or that I was asleep. After a few minutes, I needed to see what it was. I turned around in bed to see a woman in a dress standing at the far side of my room, crying into her hands. Her hair was matted and her clothes tattered. She was about 7 or 8 feet tall, crammed under the ceiling. After a few seconds, she looked up at me and screamed, but it sounded like it was coming from far away. She made eye contact with me, turned around, and walked through the wall. I stayed awake that night. Story 9. I used to work at a place which required someone to be there 24 hours a day. The reason was that I handled sensitive documents and files, and if somebody needed this information in the middle of the night, I would have to fetch it for them or confirm that I had it. Security was tight. Bars on windows, multiple locked doors to get to where I was. They would give me work to do during the night, but underestimated how quickly I could get it done. Like most nights, I finished my work in about 30 to 45 minutes and pulled out my phone to play games or browse the internet since nobody else was in the building at night. It was getting to be the last third of my shift when all of a sudden I heard a door close. I looked at the security camera and saw someone walking down a hall towards my room. At first I thought it was just somebody that came in ridiculously early, so I turned around and waited for them to come in. But nobody came in, and the hair started rising on my back. This was not a really big building, so I figured I would find the person wherever they were and started checking offices and storage rooms, but came up empty-handed. However, I did see that a fire door had shut. I tried to rewind the camera, but the digital recording was password protected, and I did not know the password. The whole thing freaked me out. The way the person was walking down the hallway, like a determined walk right to where I was. I sat with my spine tingling for the last couple of hours of my shift, and finally people started coming in. My replacement showed up and I told her what I saw, and at this point I figured I must have imagined the whole thing. I was told to go home and that the manager and the girl who replaced me would look over the camera. After getting home, I called my manager and asked what was on the camera. They said that the video showed the fire door closing, but then the video froze for about an hour. The next thing it recorded was me reopening the door. Story 10. This only happened a couple of months ago, but is definitely the creepiest thing I have ever experienced. My mom and stepdad had gone on a holiday to the United States for 3 months, and I was home by myself. I had a friend come over for dinner and just a general hangout, and she did not have her license yet, so I had to drive her home. It was around 11:30 at night when I got home, pulled into the driveway as the roller door was opening. I just happened to glance out my window, and there was this guy standing right there, as in he could have reached out and opened my car door. I freaked out, sped into the garage so fast, and started closing the roller door. While it was closing, the slowest it has ever taken to close, I looked in my rearview mirror, and this guy was walking up my driveway. He had clearly deviated from a normal route and was walking towards my garage. The door closed just in time, I swear. I made a mad dash from my car through the connecting room into the house. The connecting room has two windows that do not have curtains on, and the guy was standing right there at these windows. I was not going to hang around and see if he wanted a cup of tea. I locked the house up and grabbed my dogs and tried to reason that I was just overreacting when I heard the gate to the backside of my house bang, and I did not remember locking it so any person could walk in. This was the middle of winter in Australia, and it was raining and cold, so the last thing I wanted to do was go out there and possibly get hurt. So I just huddled up and pretended like nothing was happening. Probably the dumbest move, and in hindsight, I should have called my dad, who lives 5 minutes away. I was literally thinking of the stereotypical person in horror movies who makes all the wrong choices. Fast forward through a pretty much sleepless night to be greeted with this news report. I am not kidding when I say that this was literally down the road, a 2-minute walk from my house, and happened half an hour after everything at my house. Weird things kept happening for the next couple of nights, like the power to the lights being shut off from the breaker box. Not tripping. I called my dad around for that because I was not going to be that stupid. Story 11. My mom grew up in a little university town on a river. During her late teens, she and her friend would raft down it, then bike back home with the raft on their back. They did this one day, and she dropped her friend off at her house before going home. The friend's mom heard them approach, opened the upstairs window, and yelled out, "Friend, oh my God, get in here right now." My mom and her friend just looked at each other, and my mom said, "Your mother is so weird." So she went home and decided to sunbathe in her backyard. She slipped on a bikini and lay out on a sun chair. After a short amount of time, she heard a helicopter overhead. It was not privately owned or a news helicopter, but something police or military, and it was buzzing a short distance above her house. She did what every girl in a bad movie does and screamed, "Pervert!" She figured this military kid was looking at her during his practice flight or something like that. But then she heard footsteps in the neighbor's yard. It was a tactical team, whether army or police she never clarified. But one is just as likely as the other to someone as uninformed as I am. As it turns out, this small town has a prison, which is completely true because I live in said town right now as a student. A convict escaped from said prison, took off across town, entered her neighborhood, and took the elderly couple a few houses down from her hostage. He forced them to get into a motorhome they owned, drive him out of town, and then he ended their lives. During all of this, my tiny young mother was biking around completely unaware, then sunbathing a couple of houses away from a convicted murderer. My whole life, she has always been paranoid about people breaking in or kidnapping me and all kinds of horrible stuff like that. Her behavior did not make sense to me until the day she told me this story, and then it all kind of clicked. Story 12. This is actually my husband's story. When he was in high school, he and some of his friends had a camp out at his friend's aunt and uncle's house in the country. They did the usual cooking out, putting up a tent, and so on. At some point during the night, my husband went for a short walk near a small pond on the property to relieve himself. As he was doing that, he looked up and saw a man walking around the edge of the pond towards him. He clearly saw this man, who was walking with his head down. He described him as wearing a red flannel shirt, jeans, and work boots. He thought it was very strange that this guy was out walking around a pond in the country in the middle of the night, so he called, "Hey man, what are you doing?" He did not get an answer, and the guy kept walking past him and was now facing away, when suddenly he just was not there anymore. My husband went and told his friends what happened. The boy whose relatives owned the property was shocked and immediately ran to the house and woke them up. He had my husband describe what he had seen. The boy's aunt immediately started to cry. She had been seeing the same guy in the house, sometimes standing at the foot of the bed, and her husband did not believe her. He had been accusing her of imagining things, and apparently they were at the brink of divorce from this issue. She was so relieved that someone had been able to validate what she had been experiencing. Story 13. My friends and I were visiting a graveyard a couple of blocks away from home on Halloween, just for fun. There is a building that restaurants have been going in and out of for years, and none of them ever seem to stay open for long. The graveyard is basically this place's backyard. On that night, for some reason, the lights were on in the building, and there was a lady in a pink dress standing in the window just staring at us. There was no restaurant open there at that time. We all kind of booked it, and this lady followed us from window to window as if she was gliding, not walking, which made us run even faster. We sprinted down the road, and there was a segment without windows for her to follow which direction exactly we went. But by the time we got to the next set of windows, running full speed, she was already standing there, watching in our direction. We never made that trip again. Story 14. I was home with only 2 other people in my house, and all the lights were off except for the living room where we were. The stairway leads into the living room and the dining room, so you can see into the dining room from where we were. The other people in the room were looking at a book when suddenly I had a weird feeling that I needed to look into the dining room. I looked up, and there was the silhouette of a very tall, broad person in the doorway, looking into the living room. This was weird because, first of all, there was no light on in there, so how was I seeing this pitch black figure? And second, why was there someone in my house? This happened over the course of maybe 8 seconds. Me looking up, noticing the thing, staring at it, and then suddenly it turned and abruptly went through the wall. It literally just went through the wall. I was completely confused. I was a kid then, and one of the other people in the room was my younger sibling, so I did not say anything because I did not want to scare them. Nobody else has seen anything like this in my house, but we have all had weird dreams involving a younger girl. Nothing involving anything like what I saw, and it has not happened since, which is kind of unfortunate. The most interesting thing to me is that I was not really scared. It did not have a bad vibe to it at all. It just felt like it was observing us, just seeing what was going on. And once I had a nightmare where at the very end I had been looking into a mirror and saw someone behind me, and then woke up staring straight at a mirror that was in my room in front of me. Story 15. My uncle still has no explanation for this one. When he was a student, he shared a flat with a couple of friends. One day they were hanging out, having a couple of drinks, and planning to make dinner. My uncle got out a glass dish and put it on top of the oven so he could begin preparing food, but got distracted and went back into the living room. Half an hour later, he came back to carry on with dinner. What he did not realize was that the hob had been on the entire time, and the moment he touched the dish, it exploded everywhere. It was something to do with the temperature change. Pieces of glass had melted the linoleum floor, were embedded in the walls on the opposite sides of the room, and they were even finding bits of it in the hall for several days after. The kitchen was literally like a scene from a movie, but my uncle did not have a single scratch on his body. He was standing right in front of it when it went off, and the creepiest part is that there were pieces of glass embedded in the wall directly behind him. Story 16. This is not a story about ghostly figures or haunted houses. It is about living in a place for 10 years and feeling that place abruptly turn on you. Places have feelings to them. The country around you has its own atmosphere that you get used to. I used to live on an old southern plantation turned horse farm. It was over 1,000 acres of mostly woods and pastures. One day I was walking and exploring with my dogs down one of the horse trails in the woods about 20 minutes away from the house and decided to randomly go off trail. I made a 90-degree turn, climbed down into a spring, then up under an ancient barbed wire fence, and wandered along for a while until I found 2 large limestone caves directly across from each other. Both entrances were blocked by a bunch of rocks haphazardly stacked on top of each other, but they were not entirely blocked. I really wanted to go inside, but common sense told me I did not have a phone, nobody knew where I was, and if a snake bit me or I broke a leg on the rocks, I would be in trouble. So I just looked around the caves and found this old knife that looked like someone had carved it from a deer horn. As soon as I picked up the knife, it was like the woods changed. If you have ever lived out in the country for a long time in the same place, you get a feel for it. My dogs got closer and clung to me. I felt distinctly unwelcome. I put down the knife, but that horrible feeling stayed until I was totally out of the woods and almost home again. I never felt comfortable alone in those woods after that. It was like one moment I was happy and exploring. The next I was being watched by someone who very much hated me. I am sure it could be explained as nerves or whatever, but I looked for the caves later and never found them again, despite knowing exactly where I left the trail. I know that feeling of connection with land. I used to be able to wake up and go outside and know immediately if something was wrong. A sick horse, a loose horse, people hunting on our land. Nothing I can explain, just a feeling. Whatever I felt when I picked up that knife, it was really hostile. That is probably my most unexplained experience. Story 17. One night 2 summers ago, I woke up around 2 in the morning and was just about to fall asleep again when I saw my brother standing in the doorway of my room. He ran towards me at a very high speed and stopped with his face about a foot away from mine. I swatted my arm at his figure, and he slowly disappeared right in front of me. It was probably my eyes playing tricks on me, but it was still creepy. Last winter, I was going to my mom's house to say goodnight. I had been helping her clean earlier that day because she was preparing to move. After leaving to run a couple of errands, I returned to say goodnight before heading home. I walked inside, thinking she was asleep on the couch in the living room, but she was not there. So I decided to go upstairs in case she was resting there, but she was nowhere to be found. I was a little weirded out, but then thought she might be in the kitchen or bathroom. When I could not find her, I realized I was alone in the house. Let me tell you, this house was over 100 years old and plenty of creepy things had happened there that I could never explain, hence why I was scared in the first place. I called for my mom to make sure she was not there and heard a weird cough or choke in the basement. I froze, checked my phone, and saw a message from my mom's friend saying my mom was with her. That was enough for me. I ran out of the house and called my boyfriend so I could distract myself while making sure all the doors were locked. As I was walking around checking, something from inside the house slammed hard against a window right next to me. The sound was so loud I thought the glass had shattered, but it had not. I screamed into the phone and ran to my truck, then got out of there. No one else was in the house, so I cannot logically explain what I experienced. Let's just say I am glad we are no longer associated with that house. I hope whoever owns it now finds it a happier place than my family and I ever did. Story 18. Back in my college days, I was walking home with my sisters from a sorority meeting. We did not live on campus, but instead about a 20-minute walk away. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, and for the first few minutes, we were alone on the streets. No cars, no walkers, nobody. Eventually, someone appeared, walking towards us. He was a tall, older man on crutches with a black dog at his side. We stepped aside to let him pass and said hello, but he did not respond. However, his black dog looked at us with what seemed like fear before quickly rejoining its master. A few blocks further, we heard the crink-flop of crutches again. As we approached a corner, there was the same man walking towards us once more. This time his dog was brown. Again he ignored us, while the dog looked scared before hurrying back to him. Nearing home, we heard the sound of crutches again, but could not tell where it was coming from. When we turned onto our street, about halfway down the block, the man stepped out from a building, our building, and walked past us again. This time the dog was yellow. Each time the man walked silently, and the dog always looked at us, scared, before following him. To this day, I have no way to explain how a man on crutches could catch up to us multiple times, how he knew where we lived, or why the color of his dog kept changing. Story 19. My friend, let's call him Jake, used to tell us about how his home phone would ring early in the morning, always around 5 o'clock. It would ring 4 times and then stop. He said it freaked him out because he could not imagine who would be calling at that time and why they would suddenly just hang up. I assured him it was probably some automated scam call. A couple of weeks later, he told me it happened again. A relevant detail is that Jake had a younger brother with disabilities, let's call him Dale. When I came over to hang out, Dale would always be there with us, making sounds but not really able to communicate. We would usually just put something on the television and hang out. About the 6th time Jake complained about the phone ringing, he said he actually managed to answer it. He told me, it was just a constant buzzing sound. I picked it up, held my breath, and listened. It sounded like television static or something. He figured it was just another automated call. But the next day it happened again. And this time when he picked up, the line was still live. The buzzing noise was there, but Jake also heard shuffling and breathing. He said he froze and listened. After about half a minute of buzzing, he heard Dale in the background making surprisingly coherent sounds, almost like he was responding. Then the buzzing would stop for a second and start again. This went on for about 15 minutes before Jake went into Dale's room and put the phone down. He thinks Dale must have been picking up the phone each time and interacting with the noise. Jake said he had never heard Dale sound so coherent before, and he has not since. The phone calls eventually stopped. Story 20. When I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, I was staying the night at my grandparents' house. I was on the couch trying to sleep when I heard whispering. They had a painting of my aunt hanging on the wall in the living room, and it was talking to me. Not in a creepy way, just the way my aunt would talk to me, asking if I was behaving and other typical aunt talk. She told me to wake my grandfather up because she needed to talk to him. I did, and when he realized she was not there, he began scolding me. In between threats and insults, he noticed someone moving outside the window. He grabbed his pistol and told me to stay in the room with my grandmother. A minute or two later, we heard a gunshot. It turns out there is a prison for young adults about 20 miles from where they live. 3 of them had killed a guard and escaped. They were sizing the house up to take his truck and whatever they could, but he saw them first and ended up shooting one of them in the shoulder. I have no idea why that painting was talking to me. They have never experienced anything ghostly before or since. Story 21. There is a park I live pretty much right next to that has a gravel track encircling a decently sized soccer field and a small adjacent softball field. There is a set of bleachers sitting right in front of a really thick trunk tree with one of those street lamps that give off that whitish light and that distinctive high-pitched monotone hum. One relatively calm, relaxed night, my friend and I were just sitting on the top layer of those metal bleachers after having done our weekly laps and 1-versus-1 soccer game. We sat and chatted for a minute until I felt a sudden feeling of dread. Hard to explain, but all I can remember is feeling extremely scared and distressed out of seemingly nowhere. I was looking around for whatever could be making me feel like this when I looked directly to my left. My friend was sitting to my right. Lo and behold, I saw what looked to be a stickman illuminated by that street lamp. A literal stickman, something a first grader would draw. Round, featureless head, extremely thin extremities and body, and completely black in color. It stood a few feet under eye level to 2 16-year-olds sitting on 7 or 8 foot tall metal bleachers, which would place it around those same 7 or 8 feet. I could see that it was somewhat slowly, but clearly walking towards us. Something about the way it walked, though, is one thing I will never forget. Honestly, I could not even begin to explain the thing's gait. Just know it was creepy, unnatural, and overall extremely distressing. My friend got curious and leaned over to see what I was seeing. It suddenly stopped walking when he leaned over. He immediately and hurriedly whispered, "What the heck? No, dude, let's go." We carefully made our way off the bleachers, heading back to my place. Our eyes were basically glued to this thing, and we were both sweating bullets on the verge of panicking and thoroughly scared. About 10 seconds after we stepped off the bleachers completely, it just bolted at us. No warning, no noise, no nothing. Just frantically started to run at us. Only it was more of a gallop, for lack of a better word. The second it began to run at us, we ran as well. Frantic, heavy-footed, scared, running for dear life out of that park and away from that thing. My friend tripped in front of me, giving me no time to react, bringing us both to a halt. We both tried to get up as quickly as possible, but we decided to look at the thing to gauge our distance. 5 feet. It had stopped 5 feet away from us and then immediately bolted in the opposite direction. I think I could hear the rough thump, thump, thump of the thing's footsteps as it galloped away from us. But I am not really sure. We made it back to my place and just sat there in my kitchen, sweaty, hearts pounding loudly, trying to comprehend what had just happened to us. Story 22. I worked at a hotel that was over 100 years old in downtown San Diego. It is supposed to be haunted, but I am a skeptic and I do not hold forth with such things. I was working the evening shift and was about to get off for the night. It was around 10:30 and I was off at 11. My manager and I were friends and had plans to get a drink at the dive bar. We love so much next to the theater across the street. So we were getting all the paperwork done early, doing the money drop, etc. Then a group of about 10 came in, a Japanese tour group needing rooms. Normally, the rooms require a housekeeping supervisor to inspect them before they can be released. But since we were in a hurry, I went to do it for them instead. I had done it dozens of times before and it was no big deal. I went to the fourth floor and got the first one done, the second one done, no problem. In the third room, and these are really small rooms, maybe 200 square feet with the bathroom included, I started the process. Checked the closet for the iron and laundry bags, checked the bathroom to make sure there were towels and toiletries. The tissues were fanned and toilet paper folded, and so on. The doors to the bathroom and the closet were the kind you have to grab, push down, and turn to latch and unlatch. They closed solidly. Everything looked good, and I started to head between the beds to call my manager that this one looked fine, and that's when it happened. I felt a man's hand come down hard on my shoulder. It even ripped my hair out of my hair clip. I spun around with my arms up and no one was there. I looked back and forth and checked the ground thinking maybe my manager or the only night bellman was playing a prank on me, but I was all alone. Then the doors to the closet and the bathroom all opened and slammed shut. Once, twice, 3 times at the same time. My manager said I came downstairs and went straight into the back, white as a sheet, without saying anything. I do not remember going down, but he gave them the rooms and we did not get any complaints. I to this day cannot explain what happened in that room. Story 23. I just want to start by saying I do not really believe in things like premonitions or anything paranormal such as ghosts, but my experience seems too odd to be just a coincidence. 9 years ago, I was living in London. I had just split up with my boyfriend R, but we were going through a brief period of being friendly. We had been running a pub together, which absolutely ruined our relationship. The pub was in a really old building, and the landlords had rented out the rooms above the pub to backpackers who had their own entrance to the building. The bottom part of the building was our pub. There was a kitchen to the rear, as well as a room without windows, which we used as a bedroom, and these were joined by a hallway. In previous years, the kitchen had been part of the pub, and all the rooms were accessible from the pub, but the landlord had rented out the kitchen to a takeaway joint in the past, so they were now two separate entities. We used them for ourselves but could only enter via its own entrance on the other side of the building. Anyway, R was away at a stag party, so I had closed and locked the pub and gone to our little room via the side entrance and went to bed. Now, before I go any further, I have to explain that I can control my dreams. It is something I have always been able to do. Generally, I still dream random or scary things, but if I do not like where it is going, I can rewind the dream and choose a different action, much like a choose-your-own-adventure book, and get out of bad situations. For example, if I dream someone is trying to hurt me and is hiding behind the door, just as they are about to attack me, I rewind the dream but now know they are behind the door, get a cricket bat, and bop them on the head and get away. That sort of thing. So this night I had this dream. I dreamed I was in my bed, but the bed was in the middle of the pub, and I knew someone was trying to break in. I could see their shadow at the windows and the door, and hear them trying to get in. I was terrified. Normally at this point I could control my dream and get out of it, but this dream I could not. I was stuck in it. The minutes passed and I felt very threatened and scared, and knew the person who wanted to come in would get in soon. I started shivering and realized I was incredibly cold. Somehow I understood that the cold was linked to the burglar. I crawled behind the bar, reached up for the heating panel, and turned the heating up. The room heated quickly and the burglar disappeared. I suddenly woke up feeling more scared than I had ever been in my life. I was home alone, and the feeling of terror stayed with me. Plus I felt freezing cold. I turned on my little fan heater, grabbed blankets, and sat in bed scared and shivering for hours until I eventually fell asleep again. The next night, R was back from his trip. After splitting up, he would sleep in one of the spare rooms above the pub, leaving me with the back room. But when he got back, I told him that the back room was too cold, so I wanted to sleep in the pub on the sofa that night. Bearing in mind that I did not think much of the dream, I just did not want to be in that cold room. Although the bad dream centered around the pub itself was very warm, so it was a much more enticing place to sleep. R said that if I did not want to sleep in the back room, he would. So we closed the pub at the end of the night, and he and I sat up until around 2 in the morning, just chatting and having a couple of drinks. Eventually he left as I needed to sleep for my day job. He said he was going to stay up and watch movies. He said goodnight and left. I locked up and went to sleep on the sofa. Around 5:30 in the morning, I woke up to quite a bit of noise coming through from the wall between the pub where I was and the hallway on the other side where the back room and the kitchen were. It carried on for ages, and I started getting angry at R next door, obviously drunk and looking for some DVD or something. So I got in a bit of a huff, walked out of the pub, around the building, and opened the metal door to the back rooms. I no sooner walked in a meter than I came face to face with a strange man in the hallway heading towards the bedroom. I started screaming, "Who are you? Who are you?" rather hysterically. The man looked equally shocked and said, "I'm leaving now." I, probably very stupidly, said, "Like heck you are," kicked the metal door closed behind me so it deadlocked and started screaming, "R! R! Exclamation mark, R!" The burglar bolted, running down the hall and up through some sort of hole he had managed to get through the roof. R burst out of the room blind without his glasses and clutching some sort of weapon, maybe a bat of some sort. But by that time, the guy was on the roof and gone. We called the police, but he was never caught. If I had not had that dream, that super scary dream which I could not control, if I had not been so worried about the cold, which I had felt in that dream, it would have been me, asleep, alone, in that room without windows when that burglar came in. At the time, I did not realize it was a premonition, but looking back, it is the only way I can explain it. It is weird how it is almost like I knew I would not just respond to a bad dream, so the whole cold thing came into play. I have had another premonition, but I cannot remember what happened. It was nothing major, not like this. Story 24. My freshman year of college, my friend said he knew of a haunted house in his neighborhood, which was relatively close to campus. I had never been a big believer in ghosts, so I thought this would be fun to go see and mess around at. The story was that the father of the family who lived in the house had gotten out of prison and proceeded to end the lives of his wife and twins in the house. When we got there, 3 of my friends stayed in the car, and 1 got out but would not go past the sidewalk. My friend who told us about the house said he had never seen a person knock on the front door. I took this as a challenge because I said I would not get scared. I ran up and knocked on the door, and after 3 knocks, my friend who was on the sidewalk let out an ear-piercing, bloody scream I have never heard him repeat since. I turned around to see the 4 of them in the car driving down the street, leaving me stranded at this house. I finally caught up to them 3 blocks away and got in the car and said, "What the heck, guys?" I looked at my friend who screamed, and he was just sitting in the back seat of the car, rocking back and forth, mumbling words none of us could comprehend. After about 10 minutes of us asking him what was wrong, he suddenly sat straight up and looked at me with this look of pure fear I have never seen before and said, "When you knocked on the door, the ghosts of the 2 twins appeared in the upstairs window, waving at me to come into the house." Story 25. There is this old bridge in my town that is supposedly haunted by a young girl who drowned in the river beneath it. Apparently, if you came at the right time, you could hear her scream. When my buddies and I were in high school, we had nothing better to do than go ghost hunting. Being from a town of 6,000 people in southern Illinois, half of that being prison inmates and mental health patients, you have to get a bit creative to have any sort of fun. Anyway, we got to this bridge at about 3 in the morning, and we sat there for a while. Nothing. About 20 minutes went by, and we were all skeptical. Everyone was joking about how dumb this was or trying to creep each other out. All of a sudden, screaming. The most blood-curdling, high-pitched screaming you have ever heard. It was not just one scream either. It never stopped. It kept going even as we were driving away in our cars. But that is not even the worst part. My buddy and I hightailed it back to the cars as soon as we heard the initial scream because you had to walk a bit downhill to get underneath the bridge. Halfway back, we both went from sprinting to a dead stop at the exact same moment. I never asked him what he saw because I saw it for myself. It was a girl running on all 4s into the woods. I do not talk about this much because it gives me chills just thinking about it, and nobody ever takes me seriously. If you knew me in real life, I do not have the ability to lie. I had always believed in ghosts because I was raised on scary movies and watching ghost shows. In a way, this was one of the best experiences of my life. To experience something like this, it is unlike anything else. Just knowing that maybe there is something after we die is comforting in a way. Since the incident, I have gone back, and actually am planning on going back quite soon with people who have never been. I will tell more about my other experiences if there is any interest. There are some strange things that go on underneath that bridge. Story 26. Driving home from a movie in Peoria, Illinois with a buddy of mine on the first day of Christmas break during my senior year. We had just gone to see a horror movie. It was Krampus, so take that for what it is worth. And I, the driver, decided to take a back way home. It was around midnight and the weather was cold, so nobody else was anywhere we could see. I went to turn onto an even more rural road, and my buddy let out a blood-curdling scream and ducked. He and I had been in an accident together a month earlier, and this was the first time we had been in a car together since. I thought he was being a jerk, but sure enough, there was a lady standing on the side of the road in 15 to 20-degree weather, wearing only a shirt and jeans. No houses anywhere around and no broken down car either. Immediately after we passed her, 3 cars came out of nowhere and started tailing us at around 80 miles per hour. I took a 10-mile-per-hour curve at about 45, and they were still gaining ground on us. Still following the route home, I pulled far enough away from these guys to whip into another friend's driveway and turn my lights off. They drove by slowly but did not pull in. We both told our girlfriends, but until now, nobody else has heard this story. Not something we talk about in person either. Story 27. When I was young, my grandpa would take me to a farm owned by a close friend of his just about every weekend. We would go hunting, fishing, and camping out there. There were caves and creeks and ponds all over it, and I had a blast every time. We would also help with various chores around the place when we would go. Sometimes my brother and I would feed cattle, nurse calves from a bottle, and paint outbuildings. You know, typical farm chores. One year, my grandpa was helping clear underbrush in the woods by way of a controlled burn. I was old enough to go along, but young enough that I had to stay with Grandpa and could not help. At one point, I said I had to go pee while we were by a creek. Grandpa told me to go around the bend and hurry because he was going to burn this creek bottom, and then we would go in for dinner. As I rounded the bend to take a leak, I saw her. There was a naked woman lying face down in the creek bed by a pile of brush. I could see she had long brown hair and purple bruises on the parts of her that touched the ground. I was so scared I froze. A while passed and my grandpa walked around the bend calling for me. I did not realize it until he touched me. I jumped and he asked me what the matter was, and I pointed to her. He looked, sighed deeply, shook his head, and looked at the ground and said his friend's name under his breath. Then my grandpa said, "Best not to get involved," before he walked close by her and used his drip torch to set the area around her on fire. I spent the rest of the evening sitting in the three-wheeler while Grandpa dragged brush to the bend and pushed it down into the creek. We missed dinner that night, and I never spoke to anyone about what I had seen. It could be my imagination, but that night when my brother came in from brush burning with my grandpa's friend, he looked sad and would not talk. I felt like he felt the same way as I did, but I just do not know. Story 28. I would not call it creepy, but it was really one of those moments that make you wonder how coincidence can be so uncanny. My wife and I dated in high school. We both were kind of standard teen romantics, passing a few love notes and nothing big. I walked her to her classes whenever it fit in my class schedule, gave a nice long embrace and kiss followed by longing teenage farewells before the next moment we could spend together. I devised this romantic plan for no reason at all other than just because it is Wednesday. I would go to each one of her classes before her and leave a little note with a small gift, each time accompanied by a single rose. At the last period of the day, she would have a gift, a rose and a love note from every class. And the last period would have a bouquet of roses with a final gift and love note. I expected to not see her most of the day, as I would be avoiding her to make time to visit her classes in between periods. Here is where it gets weird. I bought the roses from our local grocery store, and nobody but me knew of my plan. My parents did not even know I had roses in my room, as they were not home when I rode my bike to the store. I had not shared the idea with anyone from school, teachers, my parents, or even the cashier at the checkout line. All the gifts were handmade or something special to me or to us. I planned this all in a single night after class on Tuesday and was going to do it all on Wednesday. No birthdays or anything, just because All day as I ran around, class to class, not seeing my wife, girlfriend at the time, I showed up to my first class. Lo and behold, there was a single rose and a mixed CD with hearts and stuff, accompanied by a note. And in succession, each of my classes had handmade gifts, notes, and a single rose. After about the fourth period, there were 6 in a day, I sought her out to ask, "Okay, how did you know I was doing this?" She had no clue and swears to this day she never knew I was planning it and was as shocked as I was. She had purchased the exact same batch of roses from the same local grocery store too. When I got to the last period and got my bouquet of roses, I just put them all with hers so she had a massive bouquet of red roses. But to this day, I swear I had no clue what she was planning. And I am sure without a doubt there is no way she could have known. And yet we devised an identical romantic gesture on the same day for no other reason than just because. Story 29. This is a story my dad loves to tell me and my brother and swears it is true. My dad was studying the evening before the bar examination that law students have to take after completing their graduate programs. While he was studying, he heard a large crash and thud at his front door. My dad opened the door only to find an elderly man lying face down in the bush outside of his condo. My dad quickly helped the old man up and took him inside to help clean him up and call for help. When the man came around after the fall, my dad realized the old man was completely blind. My father brought the man new clothes, cleaned off the scratches on his knees, and then offered to have the man over for dinner. The man gladly accepted. During the dinner, my father helped the man eat his meal, but aside from that, the two said very little to one another. Once the man had finished his meal, he thanked my father and told him he needed to leave because he had overstayed his welcome. My father insisted he stay until he felt better, but the man insisted he needed to leave. Before the man left, he turned around and said to my father, "Richard, do not worry. You are going to pass." The old man turned and left. My dad was completely perplexed because he had never told the man his name, nor had he told the man that he was studying for an examination. Sure enough, once the results for the exam were posted, my father discovered he had passed. A few days after the exam, my dad went to his mailbox in his unit to retrieve his mail. While he was going through his mail, he found someone had slipped a piece of notebook paper through one of the slits in the mailbox that read, "I told you that you would succeed." Story 30. My best friend's mother, we will call her Sarah, was a very down-to-earth, logical lady. She did not believe in ghosts or the paranormal. She worked in the medical field, was very smart, and she was the last person I would expect to make up stories to scare kids. My best friend was hanging out over at our house because his mom had an appointment a couple of towns over. It was just starting to get dark when Sarah called my mother saying she would be a bit late and that she, Sarah, had picked up a girl who was abandoned on a back road. This teenage girl supposedly lived in the next town over, and her boyfriend had kicked her out of his car after she refused to have IS with him after the homecoming dance. The only problem was, it was after 9 at night, and she was out in the middle of a back road with little traffic, no telephones, and a 3 to 4 hour walk from her house. So Sarah, being the lovely lady that she is, picked her up. My mom said no problem, and kept us entertained until Sarah showed up at our house crying and half panicking. She had driven the girl to the address the girl gave, but the girl refused to get out of the car when they got there, saying her dad would be so mad at her. Her dad does not like her boyfriend. Sarah got out and went to have a word with the dad, thinking this poor girl had had a terrible enough night as it was. But the man at the door was visibly agitated for entirely different reasons. His daughter had been killed 3 years before, when she had been dumped by her boyfriend on that back road and struck by a car. Sarah thought it was some kid playing a nasty prank and went to pull the kid out of the car, only to find there was nobody there. By the time she got to our house, she was a wreck. She does not like to talk about the incident and is still skeptical of ghosts, but she says there is no other explanation for why she knew what a dead girl looked like, what she was wearing, where exactly on the road she was, and that her boyfriend had left her there. Story 31. I lived on a farm in a rural area when I was pretty young, maybe 4 or 5. My dad was out in the fields working, and a dog that was not ours came onto our property. My mom had me stay inside while she went out looking for it. She recognized the address on the tag as one of our neighbors, so she loaded it into our car and left, probably thinking she would not be gone long and that I would be fine. After what felt like forever, the doorbell rang. I had been told by my parents to let them answer the door, but since they were not home, I figured it could not be too hard, so I answered it. A man who was fairly normal looking was at the door. He said that our old farm home used to be his when he was a kid, and he wanted to look around. I told him I would have to ask my parents. He said that was fine, and he would wait. I then told him that they were gone, and I did not know when they would be home. He said he would be quick, but I told him no again. He said okay and turned around. I shut the door and went on with my life and forgot to tell my parents about it. A few weeks later, our elderly neighbors came and visited, and at one point they mentioned a man wanted a tour of their house claiming it was his childhood home, but since they built the house, they turned him away and called the cops. I said he must have had the wrong house since he came here too. After that, I had a ton of adults ask me all sorts of questions about what happened and what he looked like. No one seemed to believe me that he just left after I told him not to come in. Really creepy and kind of odd. I am not exactly sure what he was up to, but if he wanted to do something bad, a young child home alone would be the perfect opportunity. I think he was actually trying to find empty farmhouses to rob and would knock on the door to see if anyone was home. If they were home, he would say it used to be his childhood home and maybe get a chance to case the place. Or if no one was home, he could probably walk right in since no one in our community locked their doors. Story 32. Years ago, I was in a bad living situation. Namely, my roommate and good friend had met and hooked up with a completely unstable woman who moved in with us immediately as she had nowhere to go. With good reason, we would discover. She was violent, really reckless, and totally unpredictable. Also a drunk and a nasty, violent one at that. It seemed a matter of time before someone would get seriously hurt or worse in this hyper-tense atmosphere, living with what was, for all intents and purposes, a demon. I was stupidly slow to get out, despite warnings from every friend and family member. I felt I had more of a right to the apartment than she did, and really she had no ally with her boyfriend, my roommate, who just put up with her out of fear and a warped sense of responsibility. And somehow this would all work out, and my roommate and I would get our old, uneventful lives back. I did not find the motivation to leave until one night, alone in the apartment, a song began playing. Somewhere in the house. Somehow the song was familiar. I got up, not weirded out in the least, and searched for the source as music was playing somewhere. Imagining perhaps a Discman, tech at the time, clicking itself on, the song coming through headphones on a nearby shelf. Meanwhile, the song became more familiar, and I realized it was a song I knew. I could not quite place it or remember all the lyrics, but it did not matter, because the song was playing, supplying the lyrics, and then I did get a little spooked. The song was about an evil woman who lives upstairs, and that is all the song is about. I was downstairs at the time, directly beneath her and my roommate's bedroom. The woman described in the song was not only evil, she was supernaturally so, like a witch out of a fairy tale. Her bloodless face ran red inside. Was she really evil? Was she only pantomime? Just as I placed the song, the music stopped. I was freaked out, mostly at how apt the song was, given the awful living situation. But I kind of moved past it in the moment, semi-convincing myself maybe it had not even happened, which seemed likelier, and likelier as minutes passed. And I eventually felt safe enough to try to remember the lyrics to the song, and at that moment the song began playing again, from the top. I could hear every horn and guitar and bass note, precisely as they appear on the actual album. An album I had not heard in years and did not exist in the house at the time. I moved out the next day, and within a week she put him in the ICU. While the news was very dire, I was in no way surprised.